Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, I just realized I never changed my rather plain Buckeye Scoop background after we finished our player interviews. So I'll do that while you're talking about whatever you're talking about next. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm very disappointed in Tom right now. He's got a Buckeye Scoop background, which is fine for the brand. You know, that's what we use during the Zooms when we want everybody to see what company we work for. You watching this video now, if you're watching it, you already know. So Tom is looking for a backdrop that is more suitable for the game. Like my backdrop, for instance, is the 2018 Big Ten championship game between Ohio State and Northwestern, which is more appropriate for the program that we are doing now. And Tom finally has switched his to, how original, the 2018 Big Ten championship game between Ohio State and Northwestern. Get your own thought process, Tom. So how are you doing now?
I'm good. I like the, sort of implied idea there that if I had put up like a Maryland Stadium backdrop, you would have been like, oh, that's very creative. Good. That's good. Good creative thinking. I like it.
Way to go outside the box, Tom. So yeah, this is a Sunday show. Today we got to talk to Ryan Day, Justin Fields, and Jonathan Cooper because it is Big Ten championship week, in case you didn't know. And before we get into that, Tom, right as soon as we were starting the Zoom call with Day and all of those guys, the Big Ten released the schedule for championship week. And you're looking at it, and man, when they initially mentioned like championship week, when they first released this final schedule, I was thinking, that sounds pretty cool. First against first, second place against second place, third place against third place. But that was I can't say a perfect world because it wasn't, but it would have been more ideal to see like these levels of teams playing each other. And that's not really what happened. Plus, there are no levels of teams. There's one level. There's Ohio State, and then there's also Northwestern, and then kind of everybody else is the same, especially after you get past maybe Iowa. It's just all different levels of badness. So it's badness against badness. Doesn't matter whether it's 3 against 4 or 2 against 5. And as we see here, they had to move some things around. Michigan is playing Iowa for whatever reason. But we do get to see some rivalry games still played in Purdue and Indiana, which is good. And anytime you can watch Nebraska and Rutgers play for the old corn trash bin.
Old corn cannon. Come on, this is easy.
Old corn cannon. There you go. That's you got to play for that.
Well, that's the doesn't Nebraska and Minnesota or someone play for the like $5 bits of broken chair trophy that started as an online gag and then turned into an actual thing? I mean, so it wouldn't even necessarily be the dumbest trophy that Nebraska plays for. So sure, absolutely. And I do like the fact that you're getting Rutgers. Like Rutgers has had this like inspiring, like feel good year where they've won, I think, as many Big Ten games this year as they have like the previous 3 years combined. And it's like, wow, Rutgers is really all of a sudden like Rutgers is people again. Good for Rutgers. And then what is their reward? They get to play at 4:00 on a Friday afternoon. It's like the Big Ten's equivalent of the 11 versus 14 game in the Big Ten men's basketball tournament. That's, it's like Wednesday and no one else is there. It's just like, oh, we'll just turn on the lights and roll out the ball, and then whoever wins, you get to play with the actual team starting tomorrow. So I do like the fact that Rutgers is even in a year when Rutgers is inspiring, Rutgers still manages to be in the shameful game that no one will be that interested in watching.
And also Nebraska once again, I guess, kind of gets punished because they also have to play in that game, and not only do they have to play in it, they have to go to it. And they have to play it in New Jersey. Tom, Rutgers, I think, is 3-1 on the road this year, and 0-4 at home. So this is a chance for Nebraska to get a steal. Obviously the big game then is Ohio State Northwestern, but it is going to see Minnesota and Wisconsin getting that opportunity to play because they had that game canceled. So you get to play for Paul Bunyan's axe and see how that goes, and see if did Wisconsin win that one last year after Minnesota won it the year before out of the blue?
Yes, I believe that Minnesota won it 2 years ago in Madison
Mhm.
in the snow, and that was the year that Wisconsin did not go to the Big Ten championship game, and then last year they were back to beating Minnesota and going to the Big Ten championship game again.
Michigan State at Maryland, amazing. Can't wait. That's going to be a good one.
I looked at that and I was like, boy, here's a good indication of how excited I am for that game. I literally cannot remember if those two teams played already this year. My assumption is that they have not, and that's why they're scheduled to play. And that was one of the, that was maybe the game after the Ohio State game that got canceled, and that's why they're playing. That's my assumption. But also, those are two teams where it's like, you could tell me they played, and me having absolutely no recollection of that game, like totally, absolutely plausible.
Michigan at Iowa, Tom, yes or no? Will the over-under be above 40?
It will be over 40, but I have a weird feeling that game's not going to get played. Like Michigan had more positives last week. Michigan had positives 2 weeks ago. Michigan had additional positives last week. They're going to be missing a bunch of people. I don't know if they're going to have enough people available to play. Like maybe they can. It just sort of depends on what position groups they're in. And, I know everyone was kind of jumping on the numbers last week as, say, Michigan was ducking Ohio State. And it's like, well, you don't know what position groups those numbers were in. You don't know how many guys are also out for contact tracing. So, just the fact that they had 9 additional new positives last week does not mean that they were ducking Ohio State. In fact, it probably means exactly the opposite, that they were not ducking Ohio State and it was legitimate. So, but I don't know quite what to expect in terms of how many guys will they have back. Did they lose everyone from their quarterback room? You could be in a spot where you really are not in great shape to play, even if you do have the numbers.
Yeah, I believe it was like 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, I guess you would call it. It was, they had 7 athletes in the entire department. Then the next week it was like 14. And then this past week it was 9. And we don't know if, how many of those are football players. You assume most of them are. Most of those 30 student athletes would be football players. And then who knows what the situation is with the contact tracing. So yeah, it is tough to say, but the 7 from the 2.5, 3 weeks ago or whatever would come off of that. So then you'd just be dealing with 14 and 9, and where would the contact tracing be there? So it's not like they're all ready to go, but we saw Ohio State without 20 or whatever last week against Michigan State. So it is possible, but I don't see them being all geared up to go to Iowa and play this game in the late December. And I wouldn't be surprised if they just it feels like they've decided to shut things down a little bit. And I don't know whether they would accept a bowl bid or would anybody want them. The bowls are another thing, Tom, because there's no reason for 60% of these bowls to exist this year, and I don't know how they can exist when so many of them seemingly lose money anyway.
Yeah, most of these bowls are a TV show. That's what they are. It's a TV show that lets people go on vacation for a week and play a game that's sort of an exhibition game. That's kind of what most of these things are at this point. And this seems very much like a year where an awful lot of teams are going to be opting out of bowl games. You've seen Boston College did it, Pitt did it. I feel like you're going to see more of them after this weekend, where it's just like, yeah, this is real hard. And it's not that, the risk reward or the, however you want to frame it, like the positive versus the negative on this. The positive is, oh, we get to go play a football game and we get to go play the Idaho Potato Bowl. And the negative is we don't get to see our families for Christmas, and we haven't seen anyone, and we have to live, in this kind of quasi bubble again for another week or 2 weeks. And it's like, yeah, I don't know if that's worth doing. And you've seen teams kind of reaching that conclusion already. The better the team is, the more likely they are going to want to play a game. So I think you're probably going to have, I think that New Year's 6 is going to get played because, if Indiana has a chance to play in the Fiesta Bowl, like you can bet Indiana is going to want to play in the Fiesta Bowl, or Northwestern. Is Purdue going to want to play in the whatever Cheez-It Bowl this year? Like, maybe not. I can't even remember what the bottom. I know the Pinstripe Bowl in New York is not happening already this year. Are they playing in the Music City Bowl or something? Like, is that going to be worth missing Christmas with your family when you haven't been able to see your family for 6 months? Like, maybe not.
The other thing is people are like, well, you get that practice time. All these teams have done all year long is practice, and you're only like less than 2 weeks out from that game. So you're really not losing a ton of practice. You may be losing like 8 to 10, 12 practices. And it's really like they have done so much practice in like Ohio State. I don't know, we're over 60 or 70 practices at this point for going to be 6 games now. And the diminishing returns basically I think are there, and you can't just keep smashing these players into each other for almost no reason. And a bowl game in Arizona, the Cheez-It Bowl against, Utah State, for instance, or Washington would be for no reason at this point. And so I would expect to see a lot of teams just be like, you cite the mental health for the kids, for the players, the grown men, if you will, and just let them go. I do wonder what's going to happen, though, once you do let players go. Does the testing go back to like 2 or 3 times a week? Do you know then that, well, we're going to get COVID back in the building because or do you shut the building down again because players are going to go spend time with family over the holidays? Do you shut things down for a while and then not let people come in for 2 weeks, after that? I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what the protocols are for after the season and how that is operated. And I'm sure there are people who are already thinking about this. I wouldn't expect Ryan Day to be concerned about that at this point, but it's going to happen for teams pretty quickly here.
Well, I mean, what's going to happen for Ohio State is very different from what's going to happen for Illinois, for example. Ohio State is going to play a game this Saturday, and then they're going to play a game probably on January 1st, and then they might play another game on January 11th. And then after that, maybe you let guys go home for a week or something, and you do your classes online, whatever. Go take a break, go have a nice a mental health day basically, but take a week or something. But then you're right. I mean, you have to probably treat it like when the guys came back in June, like they had to do all the testing. They had to, guys who popped positive had to sit out for a couple of weeks. You have to basically start the whole process over again. And I don't know if they can do that for winter workouts and just have them living that way every day for the rest of the year. I mean, or for winter workouts through spring football. That's going to be real hard. I mean, it's just, they have to have a break at some point. Illinois, I mean, or programs like Illinois, as soon as this game's over on Saturday, I mean, Lovie Smith just got fired. So Illinois is really not going to play a bowl game probably. And as soon as that game's over, they play at Penn State, which that was a really unkind thing for the Big Ten to do to poor Illinois. But they have to go to Penn State to face a Penn State team that all of a sudden is they've remembered how to football. Good for them. So they'll go to Penn State, get their heads kicked in on Saturday, and then fly back to Champaign, and then they probably just go. And it's go spend Christmas with your family, go be anywhere other than on campus in Champaign, Illinois for a couple weeks, and kind of take a little brain break, get a little R&R, and then at some point when they come back, you're gonna have to reinstate some kind of those protocols. But you cannot live just under pressure all the time. That's just not. It's not feasible. It's not viable. And at some point, guys just kind of break and just won't do it anymore.
Yeah, I imagine once they get back to Illinois, it's going to be the last day of school when the bell rings and you just tear out of there and everybody's just running in all directions, and book bags and trapper keepers are being thrown all over the place. I assume trapper keepers are still a thing in college.
At Illinois, they are, yes.
Good. Because they are usually 20 years behind everybody else in that state. So that takes us to Ryan Day today. He was asked many questions, 30 minutes of question and answers. He was asked about getting players back who were missing. And he said the last time he talked about it, he kind of jinxed things. So he pled the fifth on anybody returning from COVID. Justin Fields, though, did mention that it's good to have Nicholas Petit-Frere back and Thayer Munford and Josh Myers back. So we can expect those guys. And we've seen Tuff Borland back in practice. We've seen Josh Proctor back in practice. So, those guys have returned. It was interesting to me, though, Tom, that they had a team meal scheduled for Saturday, and they were going to hang around the facility and watch Northwestern. And then they canceled that and sent players on, home with a meal, but players went home to watch it. And so it's interesting that they had a plan to have everybody there, and then that plan was scrapped. And so, read into that what you want. But, the guys that were missing looks like they'll get some of those back, and we'll know more on Friday when we get our weekly availability report, I assume.
Yeah, or Saturday, depending on this may be another Saturday at 10:30 a.m. That may be the new normal at this point. You go back to, I thought that was an interesting contrast between this and Thanksgiving, because Thanksgiving was right when some of the initial issues were popping up, and they did like a socially distanced kind of practice and then did a Thanksgiving meal inside the Woody. And I wonder if they just kind of decided like, that didn't go great the last time. Maybe let's try something different this time. Like it would, I'm sure, have been a lot of fun for them to just sit on the indoor and watch on that like big video monitor that they have, watch that Northwestern game together, and make sure everyone's kind of paying attention and all of that. But the risk reward there is probably not worth it in the end. And there were a lot of people who questioned the decision to have Thanksgiving dinner, kind of a team dinner. And again, everything is a balancing act this year. That there was a mental health aspect to that too. Like, Thanksgiving is a time you're used to being around other people and eating a meal together as a family, as a group. And if you go back to your apartment and have to eat eat turkey by yourself, like, that's not really the Thanksgiving vibe you're looking for. One of my first years, I think my first year out of college, I was working in local TV. And here's the thing about working in local TV. The news is on every day, whether it's a holiday or not. So my first Christmas out of college, I was by myself in my apartment, and then I had to go in and produce the 6 and 11 o'clock sportscasts for Channel 4. And it's like, that was not the merriest Christmas of my entire life. And I had gone home, earlier in the week and seen my family, and it was like, okay, that's great. It's like, it's still kind of a bummer to be, for Christmas Day to be like, and I'm sitting here in my apartment by myself and going into work later. Like, and these guys have not been able to go back to see their family in, previous days. They weren't able to celebrate Thanksgiving 3 days earlier. They just have to be by themselves. So it's like, you have to balance that with the COVID concerns about gathering, and or is this an additional risk, an unnecessary risk? They made that decision with Thanksgiving. This case, like, I'm sure it would have been fun to watch with other guys and all that, but again, you're balancing everything. You're balancing the risk versus the reward, and they decided like, no, this is not worth, whatever the risk is, not worth it.
It was interesting watching college football this weekend, and it may have been the LSU Florida game where I think there may have been some LSU family members at that game, and seeing players hugging family members and girlfriends after the game. And it's just like, there are players at Ohio State who haven't seen, family in forever, and let alone going up into the stands to be with them. And I'm not sure if it was that game or it was another game in that region, but it's two different worlds at this point in terms of what the cocoon that this team is in compared to, or what a lot of these Big Ten programs are in compared to everybody else. And so, and that was some of the things when I talked to or asked Ryan Day about it, like, how quickly do you get over the Michigan thing and move on? And asked the same thing of Coop, and he's like, they both said they're just so hardened this year that it's losing Michigan in a regular year would probably just, how do you overcome that? How do you get past that? This year, as I think Cooper said, it's just, of course we're not going to play Michigan this year because this is how things have gone this year. So maybe all of the adversity that they've gone through prepared them to deal with it easier and then move on. But I know like Jonathan Cooper at some point is going to be wishing there, or just lamenting the fact that he only has 4 gold pants. And I asked Ryan Day, like, after signing day, is there going to be a point in your office where you're just like, I can't believe we didn't have that game? And right now they're too busy, and you can only get so upset about it before you realize, well, we still have everything in front of us. And as I think Justin Fields and Cooper and Day all said, like, now we're playing for rings. And there's no ring for beating Michigan. You get a pair of gold pants and you get some bragging rights. And it's something that I'm not diminishing it by any means, but everything else that they still want is still out there. So you can only hang your head so long. But I just think there's going to come a point where this spring or sometime this winter after the season, and you just like, God dang, I can't believe it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have probably gone through some version of that this year, where you look back at all the stuff you didn't do, and the stuff that you look forward to every year. And the town where I live has a 4th of July street fair, and they shut down the main street in town for 4 days. And there's carnival rides, and it's something my kids look forward to literally all year. It is like Christmas in July, and it didn't happen this year. And it's like that is like a central part of life in this town. And it's like, oh, well, just didn't happen this year. And, but everyone has that. Like, every town has their own stuff. Every family has their own stuff. People who didn't get to play a football season this year or had to play a shortened football season this year. Or there was one of the teams in Columbus, I forget which team in the Columbus City League, was in the Ohio high school playoffs. And then they had too many COVID positives, and that's it. And your season's over. Like, you've made the state playoffs, and you've got a chance to go play. And then all of a sudden, like, now it's not happening. Like, it just, everyone has gone through that all year. And Ohio State, as they said, like, we're at this point, they're just kind of used to it. It's just like the disappointment. Ryan Day basically said, like, the disappointment has been so frequent that it's just like, well, of course, like, what else? Of course that happened. But one thing that I thought was interesting, and you can address this a little bit, was the idea that Jonathan Cooper, it took 2 years, but Jonathan Cooper did basically have like one full senior season.
Yeah, that was an interesting aspect where, he missed so much of last year and decided, I'm going to play the Michigan game. That's going to be my 4th game, and then I'll shut it down. And so he got that last year. And then this year, another half season where he won't get the Michigan game, but he'll get the playoffs or the postseason. And he said last year just sucked, watching the Big Ten championship game and watching the postseason. And but he chose the Michigan game, Tom. He could have done any of those, but he wanted that Michigan game. So he made the bed. He can lay in it and deal with it. But no, I'm joking, because that poor guy. 4 games last year, and then now maybe 8 at this point, and then there's your 12 games, and you got your Michigan game, you got your Big Ten championship game, you got your postseason, and basically what he's been saying since last year as well. I want to go out and show everybody the player that I'm capable of being, and that's going to be the motivation, along with obviously winning. And he's had a very good season this year, leading the way that they want him to. And this is something I've been thinking about, Tom. Who wears the Block O next year? Who's your pick? Knowing that it probably can't be anybody on the offensive line.
Yeah, I was going to say, I immediately started thinking of the offensive line. It was like, nope, I'm sure you can't do that. I think there's a decent chance it's like a senior. Come back to me. I'm thinking. I'm thinking the first name that popped into my head was Garrett Wilson, but I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's going to be a senior, not a junior. I mean, if Chris Olave comes back, like, that would absolutely be a Chris Olave thing. But I don't think Chris Olave is coming back. I don't want to spoil any surprises, but I don't think Chris Olave is coming back.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. While you're thinking about that, Tom, let's also talk about Dan Mullen and Dabo Swinney coming after Ohio State without mentioning any names. They could be talking about anybody, saying that, questioning the lack of games. That, who knows, anybody could be playing it. If you're not playing enough games, then maybe you shouldn't be considered for the playoffs. And the best part was Dan Mullen, after the loss last night of a game they should have won, and you shouldn't be losing to LSU in the first place this year, but say, maybe we'd just be better off not playing by playing less games, because the fewer games you play, the safer you are. And I didn't realize I was going to enjoy watching Florida lose as much as I have this year, but it's always something when when Florida loses, Dan Mullen always has a nice reason for it. Doesn't really think it maybe doesn't view it as a loss. I don't know. Still thinks Florida should be involved and is mad that Ohio State, who with just 5 games is being viewed as a playoff possibility. Dabo, of course, doesn't like it either. Thinks I like how he phrased it: a 10-1 Texas A&M or an 11-game Florida. Like, you mean the 2-loss Florida? Is that what you're trying to say? Like, you're trying to hide that second loss in there? But it is good to know that games counts more than wins, and I think losses also count more than wins if you don't play enough games. So it's unfortunate for Ohio State that they will be left out of the playoffs if commissioners Dabo and Dan Mullen have anything to say about it.
Well, and just in case people think like, oh, Tony is probably being ridiculous and paraphrasing Dan Mullen incorrectly in a way to make him sound stupid, I'm going to read the direct quote. You ready? Here we go. This is from Alex Scarborough from ESPN. Mullen is asked about the possibility of making the playoff with 2 losses should Florida beat Bama in the SEC championship game. He says he doesn't have a vote, but, quote, and quote means these are the exact words he said, I guess the best thing to do would have been to play less games because you seem to get rewarded for not playing this year. Some might argue, and I'm not passing judgment on this argument.
Thank you.
Some might argue that the best thing to do would be to not lose at home to a team that had essentially quit, that was playing extremely shorthanded, and which you were a 23.5-point favorite over. In a game where the ESPN pregame show, when they talked about that line, they literally were laughing. Go find the clip of Joey Galloway literally laughing at the idea of should you give the 23 points with Florida? Like, if you lose that game at home with your Heisman candidate quarterback, like, okay, yeah, they're missing Pitts, the tight end. Like, yeah, he's an important player. Like, LSU was missing like 20 something players. I mean,
they traveled with 54 players.
Yeah, you cannot lose that game. You cannot lose that game. Dwight McGlothern, who was a cornerback who Ohio State fans may remember, he was the guy who he was out of Texas, and he tweeted something about like, hey, I would love to hear from Ohio State. Like that, if you remember that story from a couple of years ago, that's him. True freshman cornerback who they threw out on the field. And Heisman contender Kyle Trask couldn't take advantage of it. Like, yeah, okay, it was foggy. Like, yeah, it was foggy for both teams. And if you win that game, you can have that argument. You can have the, we're 11-1 and then we have better wins than they do. Like, that's an argument. We've played more games is not an argument. That's just like, well, this is the thing that we have against them. It's like, I think teams should get more points for having helmets that look like a sun-kissed soda can. Like, okay, I mean, sure, you can make whatever argument you want, but it's stupid.
Yeah, to lose that game when you have everything going for you. And I saw Pitts on the sideline, like, wanting to play, and it seemed pretty clear, like, the reason he didn't is they kind of held him out, like, we won't need you. We've got this one sewn up. And clearly they did not. And just the throwing of the shoe, Marco Wilson, at the end there, like, you've got the game sewn up and you stop him and you do that. And I think that reflects poorly on the coaches. And Dan Mullen hates when things reflect poorly on him. We know that because it's always somebody else's fault. And yeah, if they win that game and they win the SEC as a one-loss champion, like, I've been the one along with you saying they would get in, and then it comes down to, well, Notre Dame better get kicked out or Ohio State is out. And so, yeah, Florida would have had the argument there, but 2 losses, they're going to need plenty of help at this point to get in, and really they have nobody else to blame but themselves, because that's a bad loss based on what we have seen from LSU this year. Although maybe it helps Texas A&M because they beat a very good LSU team like 20-7.
Yeah, and they beat Florida too. So I mean, there you go. And I mean, I guess at this point Texas A&M gets in if Clemson loses, and if Clemson loses to Notre Dame and Alabama beats Florida, I guess Texas A&M gets in with a really exciting win over Tennessee next week. Like, I mean, The thing that would be concerning to Ohio State fans in that scenario is, at that point, the 4 teams in are Alabama, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Texas A&M. Does the committee try and avoid Alabama, Texas A&M rematch? And instead of playing a beatable Notre Dame, Ohio State gets to deal with Alabama in the first round. Like they jump A&M over Ohio State just to avoid the rematch. That would be a very hard sell that Alabama, that Texas A&M, who's behind Ohio State right now, would then have to jump over Ohio State based on the strength of a win over Tennessee when Ohio State would have beaten a much better Northwestern team and also won the Big Ten. Like that's probably too hard of a sell, but that's the one thing that Ohio State fans might want to just kind of go like, what else? What else you got? Like let's not do that.
And I'm thinking the same thing, that they don't want that rematch. But you know what? If you don't want rematches, then limit the number of teams that can be in the playoffs, or else forget about the rematches. And if they were to jump Ohio State, and again, I can see it happening because I know not to trust the committee, and you know that they think this way. But having Texas A&M behind Ohio State this entire time and never moving them up, and being impressed with Ohio State, and Ohio State having more games, it would, well, maybe Tom, we'll see what the committee does this week, because now would be the week to move Texas A&M ahead of Ohio State if you're going to try to avoid the look of Ohio State being jumped after they win a Big Ten championship.
Then in that case, you're jumping them based on Texas A&M looking more impressive during their off week than Ohio State did during their off week.
That is correct, Tom.
In a week in which Texas A&M's best win just got devalued because they just lost to freaking LSU. Like, I think I don't know that that's something they can do. Like I think that you're more likely to see the committee go out of its way to avoid a rematch if it's Clemson versus Notre Dame Part 3, or Alabama versus Florida, who just played 10 days before. Like that seems more like something that you might want to over, not do. You don't need to see Clemson and Notre Dame play 3 times this year. If you're putting Texas A&M in, I think there's a pretty good argument to be made that, well, you've already seen them. So if you're putting them in, clearly you feel this is not the same team it was at the beginning of the season when they lost by 28 points to Alabama. So presumably you're expecting a very different result if you put them in, because obviously they must, you wouldn't knowingly put in a team that's just going to get murdered in tiny little pieces by Alabama. So if it's a different team, maybe it's not as much of a rematch issue as it would have been if these two teams had played the week before. But I mean, let's apply reason and logic to what the committee does and see how it works out. It's worked out great so far for 6 years. Yeah,
round peg, square hole, and all of that. And so Ohio State is now preparing for Northwestern. And I don't know if the people out there know this. Northwestern, very smart team.
Really?
They don't hurt themselves. They know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. They're sound. They're all coaches' sons.
Mm-hmm. Are they deceptively athletic? It feels like there should be some deceptively athletic players on that team.
There's a lot of it. They can hit their free throws, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But Jonathan Cooper was talking about the offensive line. He's like, yeah, they got some good veterans and a true freshman left tackle. I'm like, oh, true freshman left tackle, do they? Let's see how that one goes.
Yeah, well, yeah, he said, yeah, they got a true freshman left tackle. He's good. It's like, is he now? Okay, all right. I have not watched a ton of Northwestern because aesthetics are important to me in football, and I choose to not subject myself to Northwestern football unless I need to for a professional reason. So I was not aware that Northwestern had a true freshman left tackle, but that's a thing that bears monitoring throughout the week and perhaps on Saturday. Yes.
Yeah, and we know Northwestern's defense has been around forever. Patty Fisher is a 42-year-old middle linebacker who has been around. He came to school with Pat Fitzgerald back in 1992. They were teammates, but they've got guys that are veterans who've been around, and sure, that's all great. Ohio State scores 24, and I think they're safe in this one. I don't know how Northwestern keeps them under 24 or under, I don't know where Northwestern, I don't, 20 points seems like a lot. 21 points seems like a lot. It would take a play and a turnover, that sort of thing. I don't know that they get more than 21 in this one. I don't feel all that confident in them doing that.
Yeah, I mean, this is I think a script that we have followed a lot this year, which is, yeah, I mean, Ohio State's offense is probably good enough that they're going to score 30 something points at least, 35 points at least on pretty much everyone. There's a possibility they get held down by Northwestern and they score 31 or 28 or something like that. But this is not a Northwestern offense that is going to put up huge numbers of points. This is a much better Northwestern offense than it was last year when that game ended up 52-3 or something like that. Like this is a much better Northwestern offense than that. So they will score. They will, they're not going to get shut out on Saturday, but I don't know how they get to 30 points. And I think you have to get to 30 points to win. I just, unless Ohio State has, multiple turnovers for, scoop and scores or pick sixes or whatever, like, or gives up a real bad play in the kick game. I don't know how they get to 30 points. I posted, I don't know, a month and a half ago, whenever Northwestern had their win against Wisconsin, that was not a great result for Ohio State, because Northwestern is the kind of team where you're not going to get like a ton of credit because they're not like a brand name team, but they also are not going to get, you're not going to 59-0 Northwestern. Like they're too solid all around. It's like they're not great, but they're just solid. You're not going to just absolutely annihilate Northwestern. So you're facing a not brand name team that you're not going to be able to kill. And it's going to be a very easy result for people to point and go like, well, they only beat them 31-13. Like that doesn't 31-17, whatever. And that is not a 59-0 kind of result. And that's been a lot of Ohio State's Big Ten championship games the last few years. It's just Wisconsin and Northwestern. And they're just like solid teams that are not super exciting, but can kind of keep you down. So, I mean, the Florida loss, I think, was a very big one for Ohio State, because maybe now style points aren't quite as important as they were. But I mean, Ryan Day was asked about style points, and he basically said, like, yeah, we don't. College football is for some reason the only league where you have to worry about margin of victory. Like all other sports, it's like, did you win or not? College football is like, did you win with style? And he said, every time they worry about that, they get out kind of ahead of themselves and don't win with style. So it's like they just got to worry about one play at a time, and at the end of the game, look up and see what the scoreboard says.
And a couple times I think it happened in this game, the Big Ten championship game, where things are slower developing than they would expect. Ryan Day talking about Northwestern quarterback Peyton Ramsey, who we know from Indiana. He said he's a winner. And then I think the second thing he said, talking about how good Ramsey is he throws the ball away. So, we know how Ryan Day loves the quarterbacks who throw the ball away. And when you mentioned he's a winner who throws the ball away, he's one of those guys that maybe won't beat Northwestern, but can't necessarily beat the other team as well. Like he's going to need defense, and he's going to need other guys making plays, and he can keep plays alive. But just watching him last week, the arm strength isn't really there, and just when he was at Indiana, it's like you can only get so far with him, and like keep you in it, but couldn't get you over the top. And then we see Indiana getting themselves a quarterback who could get them over the top, and you see the difference. And the schedule that Northwestern has played this year has allowed Peyton Ramsey to do some things. Like I respect him as what Ryan Day said. He's a winner who throws the ball away, and yes, he does throw the ball away. He has won some games. I don't know that he scares anybody, but I do think there's definitely respect there from the Ohio State defense.
Yeah, and he's like, the way they talk about Peyton Ramsey is kind of the way they talk about everyone on Northwestern. It's like, oh no, there's good, solid, like won't beat themselves. You have to make plays on them. He won't, they're not going to just give the game to you. You've got to go earn it. I mean, but I'm just going to read down their list of scores. Okay. They won week 1 against Maryland 43-3. Okay. Like that was like a wow. Mm-hmm. Week 2, they won at Iowa 21-20, which, that is looking like a much more impressive win than it did back then, but 21 points. Okay. They beat Nebraska 21-13. Okay. 21 points at Purdue, 27-20, 20.7 points. Wisconsin at home, 17-7, 17 points. Lost to Michigan State 29-20, 20 points. beat Illinois 28-10. And, there's a little bit of a weather factor on that game. That looked like a miserable game with, rain or snow or whatever and wind. And I give them a little bit of a pass for that one. But, 20 points against Michigan State, 17 points against Wisconsin, 27 points against Purdue, 21 points against Nebraska, 21 points against Iowa, 43 points week one. And they haven't even, they've barely gotten halfway there since then. And again, they're not here's the number of points they've given up: 3, 20, 13, 20, 7, 29, 10. No one has broken 30 points on them this year. So it's just every Northwestern team, if you haven't seen this Northwestern team, it's basically every Northwestern team with a slightly better offense, but they're just they're fundamentally sound. They don't have super fantastic athletes, but they're not going to beat themselves. And it's going to be kind of a low scoring game. Probably bet the under.
Yeah, they are like the Law and Order of college football. The way every episode is going to go. Yes, there's going to be something grisly in it, but then things get solved at the end, and then maybe there's a little funny moment, and that's Northwestern. It's like every game should have the dun-dun before it, and then all right, let's get into this and see what happens. And it's like, oh yeah, that reminds me of the last episode when they did this, and that's Northwestern.
I have two questions. Who is the Lenny Briscoe of Northwestern football, and which other college football programs are the Northwestern spinoffs? Go.
Now, I haven't watched any Law and Orders in a long time, but a spinoff I don't know, is Illinois, is that Law and Order? I don't know, Stupid Victims Unit? I don't know. Something like that. No offense to Illinois, but
they focus on wind-related crimes down there.
But losing Lovie Smith, he's gone now. I've seen some talk about how Marcus Freeman would be a target there, and I think he's going to be a very good head coach. I think you can win the Big Ten West at any of the Big Ten West schools, but I don't feel great about Illinois. The overall mood of it. I think Freeman could bring energy anywhere he goes. But yeah, that seems like if things don't go well, and they probably won't, you're going to be starting over as Cincinnati's defensive coordinator again, or maybe Memphis's defensive coordinator again, something like that.
Yeah, Marcus Freeman has probably better options than Illinois at this point, because he can either hitch himself to Luke Fickell when Luke Fickell goes somewhere better than Illinois. I saw someone suggest that Illinois should approach Luke Fickell. It's like, that's. You want me to spoil the surprise? You want me to spoil the surprise ending where he says, no, thank you. I have been to Illinois. No, thank you. I don't need that. He turned on Michigan State last year, and Michigan State is a much better job than Illinois. So no, Luke Fickell is not going to Illinois. So he can either go with Luke Fickell to Penn State or Notre Dame or wherever Luke Fickell goes in a few years, or he can just stay at Cincinnati and be the head coach when Luke Fickell goes somewhere else. I think there's a case to be made that Cincinnati, in terms of a platform to get to a better gig, Cincinnati's a much better place to be than Illinois. You can go be the head coach of Cincinnati for 3 years after Fickell leaves, and then you can go get another job. If Fickell's going to go to Notre Dame, there's a whole lot of stops on the elevator between Illinois and Notre Dame in terms of job quality. So you can get off on one of the middle floors rather than down in the sub-basement of the Big Ten.
I also think you'll have a better chance of making the playoffs at Cincinnati than Illinois once they go to 8 games, 8 teams in the playoffs, which I still expect to happen. I don't see Illinois ever making the playoffs in a scenario of a 4-team or even 8-team. Granted, Big Ten West teams have come close, a victory away over Ohio State or Michigan State from making it. But Illinois, no, I could see Cincinnati as one of the top group of 5 teams. Once they finally do what they're supposed to do and go to 8 games, you get the 5 conference champions in there and the top group of 5 team, and then you throw in 2 wild cards that can't be from the same conference. We can't throw 3 SEC teams in the playoffs. We're going to limit it to 2. I think Cincinnati is that increases that kind of job, all of these group of 5 jobs. It increases their viability and makes them more of a destination certainly more of a destination in Illinois, which is it's such an odd stepping stone. It's like, is it a stepping stone or is it, I don't know, like a lily pad? You're gonna step on it and just go right to the bottom, because that one, I mean, we've seen success there short term, like Ron Zook, and then you can't sustain it, or you don't get out soon enough. It's just, it doesn't feel like a job, like a sleeping giant of any sort.
Well, it's one of those programs that people talk about like, oh man, if they just get the right head coach in there. And it's like, okay, I'm going to go back to 1989. John Makovic takes Illinois. They're 10-2. He takes Illinois to the Citrus Bowl. Since 1989, how many times has Illinois lost fewer than 4 games in a season?
One, if any.
One is the correct answer. They went to the Sugar Bowl in 2001 under Ron Turner.
Kurt Kittner.
That was a Kurt Kittner season.
Yeah.
And then they went 10-2, and then they lost the Sugar Bowl, so they're 10-2. After that, 5-7, 1-11, 3-8, and Ron Turner's fired.
Yeah.
And then Ron Zook comes in and just kind of, he was 2-9, 2-10, 9-4. That was the Rose Bowl year, where it took every possible weird thing happening. That was really not a Rose Bowl team, but they got to go to the Rose Bowl anyway, and got absolutely annihilated by USC. And then 5-7, 3-9, 7-6, 7-6, and then he's fired too. So there's just that's one of those that people keep talking about, like, yeah, this is a really incredible job. And I mean, maybe, I mean, you're the state school of Illinois, and there's players there, but Chicago does not produce, like the city of Chicago does not produce nearly as much football talent as you would expect for a city that size. You don't see as many players coming out of Chicago as you do coming out of like Cincinnati. Like, it just, you look at Chicago, you're like, well, there's so much football talent there. It's like, well, number one, there's not. And number two, the football talent in Chicago is not necessarily made up of players who would be super psyched to go play in the middle of cornfields in Champaign, Illinois. Like, you've got a couple issues there. I don't think that's as good a job as people think it is.
I think it could be better, and I don't know what kind of investments they're making. They should obviously be investing like Northwestern did and Purdue has, and maybe it can. It's strange that you're like, no, Purdue's a better job than Illinois. It's like, but it shouldn't be. As a state school, like Purdue is arguably the third power in the state of Indiana, behind Notre Dame, and then obviously the real power of Indiana. But I don't know how much we want to talk about Illinois. Maybe we can do that tomorrow as well, or maybe on the morning scoop we can continue this Illinois conversation. But yeah, like I said, I think anybody can win the Big Ten West because there are no dominant teams. But there's also, at any given point, you could be 3-9, and the AD is like, do I really want you around anymore?
Yeah, and like, you can get it together for 1 year. I mean, here's the list of, Ron Zook had the 1 year. Ron Turner had the 1 year. Lou Tepper was just 6-5 and 6-5-1 every year. John Makovic had the 1 year. Mike White had the 1 year. It's just like every coach is like, oh, the stars aligned once, and they went to the Rose Bowl, or they went to the Citrus Bowl, or they went to the Sugar Bowl, and then they lose that game. And then the cycle starts anew, and they go back, they plunge back into, it's like Brigadoon, the football program. They arise out of the mists once, and it's like, oh, look at this place. And then just gone, like into the mists again, and you'll see them again in 100 years. So yeah, no, I cannot imagine. I think they need to look at all the coaches I always say people should look at. Lance Leipold from Buffalo.
Those are the names I'm seeing, though. So
Chris Creighton from Eastern Michigan. Like, those are the guys they need to be going. You need to get a program building coach who's not looking to view this as a stepping stone. If you hire Marcus Freeman, even if Marcus Freeman takes the job, Marcus Freeman, if he does anything good, will be there 3 years, and then he's gone. Like, you need to find your
Tom Allen.
You need your own version of Tom Allen. You need your own version of Frank Solich. Like, find your dude who's going to come there and stay and build the program and get you to a point where you're kind of consistent 6-6, 7-5 kind of team, where, and every once in a while, maybe everything aligns and you go 10-2 and you make it to the Big Ten championship game and you play in a New Year's Six game, like once a decade. But when that happens, do not forget who you are, where you are, what you are, like, and fire that guy. Because if he could just, if you don't Glenn Mason yourself at Minnesota and like forget what you are, and then all of a sudden like boop, back into the lagoon with you.
Do you know where Tim Beck is right now? Tim Beckman, sorry.
Oh,
Tim Beckman.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
I don't know. He is. I don't know that I've heard anything about Tim Beckman in quite a while. Is he in a parking lot in State College, Pennsylvania again? I don't know.
No. Yeah, he's nowhere. He's not working. So, but he was also fired under allegations of abuse and things like that. So it is not a surprise. Also, he wasn't a very good head coach at Illinois. So, but again, Tom, we don't need to go any further into Illinois. It's just an interesting thing. When a job opens, we're going to talk about it. Was there anything else today from Day or Fields or Cooper that you wanted to touch on before we head out of here?
The only other thing that I thought was kind of interesting was Day talked about the procedure to get guys back in after they test positive for COVID. Because you have seen guys, we've talked about a couple of them now with Josh Myers, Nick Petit-Frere, Thayer Munford, Tuff Borland, Josh Proctor, all those guys. The ones of them who have tested positive, we don't know which of those guys are positive tests versus contact trace guys, but the ones of those who are positive tests, they come back, they clear cardiac testing, and then they start with running and lifting. And then they have a day where they have 30% of their reps. And then they have a day when they have 50% of their reps, and they kind of ramp back up. So they don't just go right in and immediately go right back to where they were. And he said there's a big concern with some of the skill guys where, the big guys are the big guys and they're okay. They worry about soft tissue stuff with the skill guys if they've been kind of sitting around for a couple of weeks trying to get back into it. I mean, if you were a runner and have not run for a while, like you run that first time and it's like, even if you stretch, like you can pull something, you do that first day and it's like, ooh, my thighs are killing me. Like that's, that first day back running, if you haven't run for a while. And, I am not, I don't want to spoil any surprises, but I am not a Division I caliber athlete. But even then it's like, if you're off for a while, you kind of have to ramp your way back up. You can't just do a marathon and then take 6 months off and then just run 26 miles again. Like, no, that's not how that works. You got to work yourself back up to it. So, and that's kind of interesting that's sort of the progression, and it's slow and it's gradual, but it's, the whole point of this is err on the side of caution. And I know that people have been a little bit annoyed by the 21-day process, but at this point, it is what it is. And if it keeps guys healthy, then so be it.
Yeah. And it's the same rule with Big Ten basketball. So it doesn't seem like things are changing there at any point. Although as we get into the playoffs, they go under the rules of whatever conference you're in. So it would certainly behoove the Big Ten right now to maybe change some of those rules, because if somebody pops now, they're out. They're out for the playoffs and out for the first game at least. And but again, it's about safety, Tom. So why would they change any rules?
I cannot wait for the extremely disingenuous national writer arguments where if the Big Ten does change its rules to be in line with all the other conferences, all the extremely angry, the Big Ten is just in it for Ohio State. They don't care about anything other than winning. This is disgusting. This is awful. And, nothing is said about the other conferences who've been doing it that way the whole year round. So I don't want to spoil the surprise. That's coming. It is coming. I can't wait. I'm also, I don't know if I'm going to write about this or not. I just saw like multiple people, like national people saying, what is the difference between USC and Ohio State? It's just that Ohio State was ranked ahead of USC in the preseason polls. That's the only reason they're higher. It's like, well, except for margin of victory and quality of opposition, yes, their resumes are exactly the same. Those are typically things that are used when evaluating football teams. But, if you're willing to set those aside, then yes. So you had a great piece absolutely worth reading at Buckeye Scoop. It's a free article. Check it out on the front page on the Dan Mullen, Dabo Swinney thing. I may get annoyed and write an angry.
I think you
should. Why are you people so stupid? Yeah, I might do that. I wrote a nice thing. I wrote a nice thing Saturday about how they should do do a senior day next year for the guys who were seniors this year who didn't get to do their senior day. So I did my nice thing yesterday. Maybe today I'll write my angry thing calling people names.
Exactly.
So those are always fun.
That's what the internet is for, Tom. You gotta cram it in there. And yeah, the disingenuousness of all kinds of media people except for us. We are very ingenuine. Is that? No, we are very genuine, Tom. The arguments that it's been fun to read the internet and see the shots that get taken and then to write about it. And it's I think you should write about it. Write about USC, and we talked about USC last week, where I said I like watching them because they are terrible for about 55 minutes, and then they find a way to win. And it's great that they find a way to win. And as Ryan Day said, this is the only sport where winning doesn't matter. Apparently, yeah, it does matter. But when we're comparing them to a bunch of other teams, there's no question that USC is worse than like a lot of teams. they play so terribly for so long, and then they find like I turned that game off last night when it was like, I don't know, like 35-23 UCLA, and then I went to watch something else, and then I looked back and it was like 35-30, and then eventually USC found a way to win that game just since they have so many times. And that's great. We could talk about them as a playoff team, and I am interested to see where they are. Will they be ahead of Georgia? Will they be ahead of Iowa State? Maybe they'll certainly be ahead of Indiana. We know that.
I don't know how they could be. They haven't played as many games as Indiana, so that's the only criteria that matters. So,
yeah, number of games is the most, as we know, and that was somewhat of the gist of what I wrote today. So, Tom, is that it? Are we done?
I think we're done. And I mean, this is another big game week, so I'm going to guess we're going to do more than our normal 2 shows this week again. So I don't want to promise a specific number, but it will be probably 3 or greater. So you'll have that to look forward to. And please leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes or whatever your podcast platform of choice is. That helps folks find these shows. We have greatly enjoyed having looking at our subscriber numbers recently. It's been like, oh, look at that. People want to hear our stupid nonsense. How fulfilling, how wonderful, how validating.
It is nice to be important finally. So I do like that. And I tell my wife that I'm a very important person, and she's like, oh, yeah, sure. So you're still talking about your sports, are you? And so that's just me. That's my life. So thank you all for listening. Make sure to check out BuckeyeScoop.com. As always, there's a ton there. Bill Green had an interesting bank blog this morning looking at the various playoff scenarios, and there are a bunch of them. Even though I think we all kind of feel like we know what's going to happen. That's when you think you know what's going to happen with college football is exactly when something goes awry. And Florida possibly winning the SEC championship would be interesting, and it would infuriate me because I still don't think teams should lose their way into the playoffs, which Alabama absolutely would do. But Tom, we don't have time to talk about that right now. We can talk about it when it happens, when the Gators shock the world and get left out of the playoffs. And then we get to watch Dan Mullen. Oh, full teary face crying about it. It'll be fun. I'm a little bit looking forward to it. So we will talk to you guys, I don't know, maybe tomorrow. Who knows at this point? Certainly tomorrow, Tom. Monday, I hear you have a very special guest on the Morning Scoop.
Yeah, if I can't get anyone better, Tony will be on the Morning Scoop for Monday, so that'll be good. Well, by the time we record that one, we'll have a little basketball to talk. We'll have a little more playoff talk. We may talk, do a little bit more on the Dabo Swinney and Dan Mullen conversations. All of that fun stuff. Always, boy, there is plenty to talk about right now. So we'll have that on the Morning Scoop. You can find that on all the places you find podcasts. Just search Morning Scoop or Buckeye Scoop to find that.
All right. Sounds good, Tom. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you guys later.